The blazing Nevada sun bore down mercilessly on Sarah Anderson's back as she struggled to lift another heavy bucket of water from the well. Her once white dress now permanently stained with dirt, sweat streaming down her face. She fought to keep her balance despite the black spots dancing before her eyes. Genoa wasn't supposed to be like this. When she'd arrived 6 months ago to work as a housekeeper for the wealthy Tanner family, she never imagined she'd become little more than their slave. "Faster, girl." Mrs. Tanner's shrill voice cut through the dry afternoon air. "The garden won't water itself, and you've still got washing and dinner to prepare." Sarah's arms trembled from exhaustion. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours the previous night, forced to scrub the dining room floor until Mrs. Tanner was satisfied, only to be woken before dawn to begin the day's endless tasks. 3 days had passed since she'd had a proper meal, subsisting on scraps and stale bread while the Tanners feasted. "I'm trying, madam," Sarah managed, her throat parched. "Not hard enough, Mrs. Tanner snapped, her plump figure shaded by a parasol as she supervised from the porch. "Work faster or I'll dock another day's wages." Sarah bit back her response. She needed those meager wages to save for a ticket out of this place, to send anything back to her ailing mother in Boston. That's why she'd come west in 1874, answering the advertisement for respectable work with good pay. The reality had been cruelly different from the promise. She hauled the bucket across the yard, water sloshing over the sides and onto her worn boots. The sun seemed to burn right through her threadbare bonnet as she fought to stay upright. 22 years old, and some days she felt ancient, her body wearing down under the relentless demands. The distant sound of hoofbeats barely registered as Sarah bent to water Mrs. Tanner's prized roses. Another visitor for the Tanners, no doubt probably Mr. Jenkins or the sheriff coming to play cards with Mr. Tanner while she served them whiskey and endured their leering glances. "You there, miss?" The unfamiliar voice startled her. Sarah straightened too quickly, and the world tilted dangerously. The bucket slipped from her grasp, water soaking the front of her dress as she stumbled backward. "Whoa now," the voice came closer, accompanied by the crunch of boots on gravel. Sarah tried to focus on the approaching figure, but her vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. She was dimly aware of a tall man dismounting from a handsome chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Are you all right, miss?" She opened her mouth to answer, but no sound emerged. Sarah felt her knees buckle, her body finally surrendering to days of exhaustion and deprivation. As she collapsed, strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "What is the meaning of this?" Mrs. Tanner's voice seemed distant now. "Sir, unhand my servant at once." Sarah fought to remain conscious, clinging to the rough fabric of the stranger's shirt. She felt herself being lowered gently to the ground, her back propped against the well. "This woman is about to die of heat exhaustion." The man's voice was deep, controlled, but with an edge of steel that cut through Sarah's fog. "When's the last time she had water or rest?" "That is hardly your concern," Mrs. Tanner huffed. "The girl is simply lazy, always looking for excuses." Sarah forced her eyes open, finally getting a clear look at her defender. Dust covered from the trail, but unmistakably handsome, with striking blue eyes and a strong jawline shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. His clothes marked him as a working man, a cowboy or rancher, but there was something in his bearing that commanded attention. "Here," he said softly, ignoring Mrs. Tanner as he offered Sarah his canteen. Small sips. The water was cool and sweet against her parched throat. Sarah drank gratefully, strength gradually returning to her limbs. "I demand you leave my property immediately." Mrs. Tanner was approaching now, parasol clutched like a weapon. The stranger rose to his full height, easily towering over Mrs. Tanner. "Madam, I'm Kieran Zane. I've just bought the Patterson Ranch outside town. I came to introduce myself to my neighbors." His voice remained polite, but his eyes were cold. "I didn't expect to find someone working people to death on my first day." Mrs. Tanner blanched. "Mr. Zane, we had no idea. My husband mentioned the Patterson place had sold, but is this how you treat all your workers?" Kieran asked, gesturing toward Sarah. "The girl is paid fairly for her work," Mrs. Tanner sniffed. "If she's too weak for honest labor, that's hardly my fault." Sarah struggled to her feet, mortified to be the center of this confrontation. "I should finish the garden," she whispered, not meeting either person's eyes. "No," Kieran's voice was firm but gentle. "You're done here. Mr. Zane, while I appreciate your concern, you have no authority. She works for me now." The words fell like hammer blows in the quiet yard. Sarah's head snapped up. "Sir, I need help at my ranch," Kieran continued, his gaze never leaving Mrs. Tanner's reddening face. "I'll pay whatever wages she's owed, plus a hiring fee for your trouble." Mrs. Tanner sputtered. "This is preposterous. You can't just $100. Kieran pulled out a leather wallet, extracting several bills. "That should more than compensate you." Sarah gaped at the sum, far more than the pittance she'd earned in 6 months of grueling labor. Mrs. Tanner's eyes widened with naked greed. "Well," she hesitated, her parasol lowering slightly. "I suppose we could come to an arrangement, although good help is so difficult to find these days." "Do we have a deal?" Kieran's tone made it clear it wasn't truly a question. Mrs. Tanner snatched the money from his outstretched hand. "Take the girl. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway." Sarah stood frozen, uncertain what had just happened or whether this change would be for better or worse. "The devil you know," her mother used to say. "You have belongings to collect?" Kieran asked her quietly. Just a small bag," Sarah managed, still dizzy from the rapid turn of events. "Get it quickly," he said. "We need to get you proper care." Sarah hesitated only a moment before hurrying to the servants' quarters at the back of the house. Her entire life in Genoa fit into a single worn carpetbag, 2 faded dresses, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a small daguerreotype of her mother. She changed quickly into her second dress, barely an improvement over the water-soaked one. When she returned to the yard, Mrs. Tanner had disappeared, but Kieran waited by his horse, holding the reins loosely. "Can you ride?" he asked, eyeing her still unsteady stance. Sarah nodded. She'd learned as a girl in Massachusetts, though it had been years. "Good. I'll help you up, then walk alongside until we reach town." "You need to see a doctor." "I don't have money for a doctor," Sarah protested weakly. "I do." His expression softened. "You're in my employ now, remember." Before she could respond, he hoisted her effortlessly onto the saddle, placing her bag securely behind it. "Hold the reins, but Rusty knows the way. Just stay upright." As they moved down the drive toward the main road, Sarah found her voice. "Why did you do that, Mr. Zane?" Kieran glanced up at her, sunlight highlighting the planes of his face. "No decent person would leave someone in that situation. But you don't know me. I could be a terrible worker or a thief," or a small smile touched his lips. "Are you?" "No, but then we'll get along fine." He adjusted his hat. "I believe a person should be judged by their character and their work, not worked until they collapse in the dirt." Sarah fell silent, too overwhelmed to continue the conversation. Her body still ached from exhaustion, and her mind reeled with questions. Who was this man who'd appeared from nowhere and changed her fate with a handful of words? What awaited her at his ranch? And most pressing, had she escaped one form of servitude only to fall into another, possibly worse? As they approached the dusty main street of Genoa, Sarah noticed people stopping to stare. A woman riding a fine horse while a man walked alongside was unusual enough, but she recognized the looks of curiosity directed at Kieran. Newcomers were always subject to intense scrutiny in a town this size. "The doctor's office is there." Kieran nodded toward a white clapboard building with a small sign. "Dr. Morgan is supposed to be the best in the territory." "Mr. Zane," Sarah began hesitantly, "I appreciate your concern, but I don't need a doctor, just some rest and water." Kieran stopped, looking up at her with an expression that brooked no argument. "You collapsed from exhaustion and likely malnutrition. You'll see the doctor, and that's final. I don't hire people only to let them die from neglect." His bluntness startled a small laugh from her. "You haven't actually hired me yet. You don't even know what I can do. Can you cook?" "Yes. Keep a house, of course." "Handle basic accounts," Sarah nodded. Her father had insisted she learn figures before his death 10 years ago. "Then you're hired." Kieran smiled, revealing a dimple in his left cheek that transformed his serious face. "The details can wait until you're well." Inside the doctor's office, Sarah endured a thorough examination while Kieran waited in the outer room. "Dr. Morgan," a kindly older man with spectacles and a trim white beard, clucked his tongue as he checked her pulse, eyes, and reflexes. "Dehydration, exhaustion, and undernourishment," he pronounced. "Were you working for the Tanners?" Sarah nodded, surprised by his perception. "You're the third girl I've treated this year from that household." The doctor's expression darkened. "I've half a mind to report them to the sheriff, though Franklin Tanner practically owns the man." He mixed a tonic and instructed her to drink it, then provided a small bottle with additional doses. "Rest for at least 3 days. Plenty of water, regular meals, nothing too rich at first. Your body needs time to recover." When Sarah emerged from the examination room, Kieran rose from his chair, his face questioning. "She'll be fine with proper rest and nourishment," Dr. Morgan informed him. "Are you her new employer?" "I am." Kieran paid the doctor's fee without comment. "Then I suggest light duties only for the first week," the doctor continued. "And she'll need to build her strength back gradually." Outside, the afternoon was waning, long shadows stretching across the street as businesses began closing for the day. "We'll stay in town tonight," Kieran decided. "The ranch is an hour's ride and you're in no condition for that journey." Sarah wanted to protest, but couldn't summon the energy. The tonic had eased her headache, but a bone-deep weariness remained. "Where will we stay?" "The Sierra house is clean and respectable," Kieran replied, guiding his horse toward a 2-story building at the end of the main street. "I've taken a room there until the ranch house is properly habitable." Alarm flashed through Sarah. "Mr. Zane, I cannot separate rooms," he clarified quickly, understanding her concern. "I'm not in the habit of compromising young women's reputations." The Sierra house proved to be a well-maintained establishment, with a tidy lobby and a matronly proprietress who greeted Kieran by name. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss Anderson. She'll need a room for tonight, preferably near mine in case she needs assistance. She's unwell." The older woman assessed Sarah with sharp eyes that softened at her obvious exhaustion. "Room 4 is available, right across from yours, Mr. Zane. I'll have Betsy bring up some broth and bread." Sarah's room was small but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the mountains to the west. After Mrs. Holloway departed, Kieran lingered in the doorway. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll leave after breakfast tomorrow if you're feeling strong enough." Sarah set her bag on the bed, suddenly awkward in this unfamiliar situation. "Mr. Zane, I still don't understand why you're doing this." Kieran leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. My father always said you can judge a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. The Tanners failed that test spectacularly. And what do you expect from me in return? Sarah asked bluntly, years of hard experience making her wary. A flash of respect showed in his eyes at her directness. Honest work, fairly compensated, nothing more, nothing less. I can promise that, Sarah said, straightening her shoulders despite her fatigue. Good. Kieran nodded. We'll discuss wages and duties tomorrow. For now, eat when the food comes, then sleep. After he left, Sarah sat heavily on the bed, the day's events crashing over her. Tears welled unexpectedly, not of sorrow but relief. For the first time in months, she wasn't dreading the next sunrise. The promised broth arrived shortly, along with fresh bread, butter, and even a small apple. Sarah ate slowly, savoring each bite before washing with the warm water provided. The clean nightgown from her bag felt like luxury against her skin as she slipped between the sheets. As exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, Sarah wondered what tomorrow would bring. Kieran Zane remained a mystery, handsome and commanding, yet seemingly kind. But Sarah had learned the hard way that kindness could be fleeting, especially in a world where women had few protections and fewer rights. One day at a time, she whispered to herself, an old mantra from her mother. Whatever awaited at the the Zane ranch now, it had to be better than what she'd left behind. With that thought, she surrendered to the deepest sleep she'd known in months. Morning came with golden light streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of a town awakening. Sarah opened her eyes, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar ceiling above her. The events of the previous day rushed back her collapse, the confrontation with Mrs. Tanner and the enigmatic Kieran Zane who had inexplicably rescued her. A soft knock at the door roused her fully. "Miss Anderson, breakfast will be served downstairs for another hour," came Mrs. Holloway's voice. "Thank you," Sarah called back, hastily rising. Her body still ached, but the desperate fatigue had receded. The doctor's tonic and a full night's rest had worked wonders. She dressed quickly in her second dress, faded blue calico, that had seen better days but was at least clean, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple knot. The face that greeted her in the small mirror above the washstand was thin and pale, with shadows beneath hazel eyes that had once sparkled with life. 6 months with the Tanners had taken their toll. Downstairs, the dining room buzzed with morning conversations. Sarah hesitated in the doorway, uncertain where to sit, when she spotted Kieran at a corner table. He rose as she approached, pulling out a chair for her. "You look better," he observed, resuming his seat. "Some color in your cheeks now." "I feel better," Sarah admitted. "Thank you for everything." A serving girl appeared with coffee for Sarah and a refill for Kieran, followed quickly by plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with gravy. "Eat well," Kieran encouraged. "It's a decent ride to the ranch, and Mrs. Holloway's cooking is the best in town." Sarah needed no further urging. The food was simple but delicious, and she realized how long it had been since she'd enjoyed a proper meal at a table, rather than scraps eaten hurriedly between tasks. "While you eat, I should explain what awaits at the ranch," Kieran said, buttering a biscuit. "It's 500 acres, mostly for cattle. The previous owner let things slide before he died, so it needs work. The Patterson place has been empty for months," Sarah remarked, remembering gossip she'd overheard while shopping for the Tanners. "People said it would never sell." "People were wrong," Kieran replied with a slight smile. "I got a fair price considering the state of disrepair. And you'll be raising cattle, that's the plan. I've got 60 head arriving next week, and I'll build from there." He took a sip of coffee. "There's a foreman's cabin where I've been staying, and the main house needs cleaning and some repairs before it's properly habitable. That would be your first task if you're willing. Of course, Sarah nodded. What else would my duties include? Cooking for me and eventually the ranch hands. I'll be hiring 3 or 4 once the cattle arrive. Keeping the house in order. Maybe helping with the garden out back. It's overgrown but salvageable. Kieran set down his cup. I'll pay you $20 a month plus room and board. Sundays off unless there's an emergency. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. $20 was more than triple what the Tanners had promised, though they'd always found reasons to reduce her pay. With room and board included, she could actually save something significant to send home. That's very generous, she managed, wondering if there was a catch. It's fair pay for honest work, Kieran countered. I don't believe in squeezing every penny until it screams. And my accommodations. There's a housekeeper's room off the kitchen in the main house. Once it's cleaned up, it's yours. Until then, you can use one of the bedrooms upstairs. He met her gaze directly. You'll have privacy and proper locks on your doors. I run a respectable operation, Miss Anderson. The reassurance eased one of Sarah's unspoken concerns. She'd heard too many stories of young women in isolated locations with male employers who expected more than housekeeping services. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Zane. Good. He extended his hand across the table, and they shook to seal the arrangement. His hand was warm and calloused, a working man's hand, despite the wealthy rancher he was becoming. Now finish your breakfast. We should leave before the day gets too hot. After breakfast, Kieran settled their bill while Sarah gathered her meager belongings. Outside, he had arranged for a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her face. This is Daisy, he said, helping Sarah mount. She's steady and sweet-tempered. The ranch has several horses, so you can learn to ride properly when you're stronger. The journey to the Zane Ranch took them through the heart of Carson Valley, with the Sierra Nevada mountains rising majestically to the west. Spring had painted the landscape in vivid greens, with wildflowers dotting the meadows and aspens shimmering in the morning light. After months confined to the Tanner property, the open vistas took Sarah's breath away. It's beautiful, she said, drinking in the scenery. That's why I chose this place, Kieran replied, riding alongside her now. I traveled all over the West looking for somewhere to settle. Nothing compared to this valley. Where are you from originally? Sarah asked, realizing how little she knew about her new employer. Pennsylvania, though I haven't called it home in 15 years. My father was a blacksmith in Pittsburgh, taught me the trade before he died. I'm sorry about your father. Kieran nodded acknowledgement. He was a good man, left me enough to start fresh somewhere else, which is more than many get. Is that how you could afford to buy a ranch? A smile quirked his lips. Partly. I headed to Colorado when I was 18, worked the silver mines for a few years, made a lucky strike, sold my claim, then learned ranching from the ground up working for others. I've been saving and planning for my own place ever since. How old are you now, if you don't mind me asking? 32 last month. Sarah digested this information, piecing together the outline of a man who had worked his way up through determination and, it seemed, some good fortune. It explained the confidence he carried, the ease with which he'd confronted Mrs. Tanner and claimed Sarah from her clutches. And you, Miss Anderson, what brought you to Nevada? Kieran asked, guiding his horse around a rocky patch in the trail. Sarah hesitated, then decided honesty was best. Desperation, mainly. My mother is ill. Consumption and medical care in Boston is expensive. My father died when I was 12, leaving us with little. I saw an advertisement for a housekeeper position with generous wages in Genoa. It seemed like Providence. Until you met the Tanners, Kieran concluded grimly. Yes. Sarah's hands tightened on the reins. By the time I realized what they were truly like, I had no money to leave. They always found reasons to withhold my wages: broken dishes, improperly ironed linens, meals that weren't to Mrs. Tanner's exact specifications. Anger flashed across Kieran's face. There are too many who prey on those with few options. The frontier is supposed to offer new beginnings, not new forms of bondage. They rode in companionable silence for a while, cresting a small rise that revealed the valley stretching before them. In the distance, Sarah could see a cluster of buildings nestled against the backdrop of pine-covered foothills. "That's it," Kieran said, following her gaze. "The Zane Ranch. Not much to look at yet, but it will be." As they drew closer, Sarah could make out a two-story main house in need of paint, a large barn, several outbuildings, and a smaller cabin set apart from the others. Fenced corrals stood empty, awaiting the livestock that would soon populate them. "It has good bones," she observed, seeing past the current disrepair to the potential beneath. Kieran looked pleased by her assessment. "That's what I thought. The land is what matters most: good water, good grass. The rest can be fixed with time and effort." They dismounted in the yard, and Kieran took the horses to the barn after helping Sarah down. She stood in the shadow of the main house, appraising what would be her workplace and home for the foreseeable future. The porch sagged slightly on one side, shutters hung askew, and dust-coated windows reflected the midday sun. But the foundation looked solid, the roof appeared intact, and the overall structure promised spaciousness within. Kieran returned with Sarah's carpetbag and a key for the front door. "Fair warning, it's been empty for months. Dust and critters have had free rein." The interior confirmed his warning. The entryway opened to a large parlor with sheet-covered furniture, cobwebs festooning the corners, and a thick layer of dust on every surface. A formal dining room stood to the right, and a hallway led presumably to the kitchen at the rear of the house. A wooden staircase with a handsome banister curved up to the second floor. Previous owner was a widower with grown children, Kieran explained, setting down her bag. "Lived here 40 years before his health failed. His sons took what they wanted and left the rest." Sarah surveyed the space with a housekeeper's eye, mentally cataloging what needed to be done. The task was daunting but not impossible. "I'll need cleaning supplies, brooms, mops." "There might be some in the kitchen or storage pantry," Kieran suggested. "If not, I'll make a list and go back to town tomorrow for provisions." They explored the house together. The kitchen was large and well-appointed, with a cast-iron stove, a pump at the sink for indoor water, and ample cupboards. The promised housekeeper's room adjoined it, small, but with a window that would provide good light and fresh air once cleaned. Upstairs, they found 4 bedrooms, including a master suite with its own small sitting area. "You can use any of these rooms until your own is habitable," Kieran said, opening windows to air out the musty spaces. "Choose whichever you prefer." Sarah selected the smallest bedroom at the back of the house, overlooking what must have once been a kitchen garden. "This will do nicely until I can clean my permanent quarters." In a storage pantry off the kitchen, they discovered a treasure trove of cleaning implements, though many needed repairs or replacement. Kieran carried water from the pump outside while Sarah hunted for soap and rags. By mid-afternoon, she had managed to make the kitchen reasonably clean and was working on her temporary bedroom. "You should rest," Kieran cautioned, appearing in the doorway. "The doctor said light duties only for the first week." Sarah straightened from making the bed with linens she'd found in a cedar chest and aired out. "This is light compared to the Tanners." "That's not saying much," he replied dryly. "I need to check the fences on the north pasture. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course." Sarah was touched by his concern. "I'll have dinner ready when you return, though our options are limited until we have proper provisions." Kieran nodded. "I brought some basics to the foreman's cabin. I'll bring them over before I go." Left alone in the big house, Sarah worked steadily through the afternoon, fighting the urge to tackle everything at once. The doctor's warning and her still recovering body demanded moderation. She focused on creating one comfortable, clean space where they could eat, then ensuring her bedroom was properly habitable for the night. As promised, Kieran had left coffee, flour, beans, salt pork, and other staples. Sarah found a neglected herb garden still struggling along behind the kitchen and salvaged some rosemary and thyme to flavor a simple stew. By the time Hoofbeats announced Kieran's return, she had the kitchen table set and a hot meal waiting. "Something smells good," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Just a simple stew and biscuits," Sarah replied, suddenly self-conscious. "Once we have more supplies, it looks wonderful," Kieran assured her, washing his hands at the pump sink. "I've been living on coffee and jerky most days." They ate by the light of oil lamps, the gathering dusk outside casting the kitchen in a warm glow. Kieran ate with the hunger of a man who'd worked hard all day, offering genuine compliments on the meal that made Sarah flush with pleasure. "I made a list of what we'll need from town," she said as they finished. "Cleaning supplies, food staples, perhaps some fabric for curtains." "Add whatever you need," Kieran said, pushing his empty plate aside. "I'll go to town tomorrow." "The cattle are arriving sooner than I expected day after tomorrow, so we need to be prepared." "So soon?" Sarah's mind raced, calculating what needed to be done. "I'll focus on the kitchen, your room, and the basics for now. The rest can wait until the herd is settled." Kieran nodded approval. "I've hired 2 men to help with the cattle. They'll bunk in the barn for now until I can build a proper bunkhouse. Their meals will be your responsibility too once they arrive." "Of course." Sarah rose to clear the dishes. "They'll need hearty food after long days in the saddle." "Leave those," Kieran said, gesturing to the plates. "You've done enough for one day, I can wash up." "That's not necessary, it is." His tone was firm but kind. "You're still recovering. And regardless, you're not a servant here, Sarah. You're a valued employee and deserving of respect." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you, Mr. Zane." "Kieran," he corrected, rolling up his sleeves at the sink. "If we're going to be working closely together, formality seems unnecessary." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Kieran, then." That night, in her freshly made bed in the small bedroom, Sarah lay awake despite her exhaustion. Through the open window came the chorus of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote so different from the sounds of town. The enormity of the change in her circumstances washed over her. 24 hours ago, she had been at the tanner's mercy, with no hope of escape. Now she lay in a proper bed, with a full stomach and the promise of fair treatment. She thought of Kieran Zane, his unexpected kindness, his straightforward manner. He was undeniably handsome, but it was his quiet strength and evident principles that intrigued her most. Men like him were rare in her experience. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself in the darkness. He was her employer, nothing more. She couldn't afford romantic notions, not when her mother's well-being depended on her ability to earn and save. Besides, a man establishing a ranch would be looking for a wife of suitable background and means, not a penniless housekeeper with nothing to her name. With that sobering thought, Sarah turned on her side and closed her eyes, determined to prove her worth through hard work and competence. Romance had no place in her practical plans for survival. Dawn found Sarah already at work, having risen with the first light to start bread dough rising and to continue the mammoth cleaning task. By the time Kieran appeared for breakfast, she had coffee brewing, biscuits baking, and eggs ready to fry. "You're up early," he observed, pouring himself coffee. "There's much to do," Sarah replied, turning the eggs in the cast-iron skillet. "And I've always been an early riser. Not by choice at the tanner's, I'd wager." Sarah's lips quirked in acknowledgement. "No, though my mother always said the morning hours were God's gift to those who appreciated them." They ate quickly, discussing the day's plans. Kieran would ride to town for supplies while Sarah continued bringing order to the house, focusing on preparing for the arrival of the ranch hands. "Johnson and Wilkes are good men," Kieran assured her. "Experienced with cattle and respectful. They worked with me at the Carson River Ranch last year." "I'll have suitable accommodations and meals ready," Sarah promised, "though the barn isn't ideal for sleeping. It's temporary. Building a proper bunkhouse is high on my list of priorities." Kieran rose, placing his hat on his head. "I should return by mid-afternoon." Alone again, Sarah attacked the house with renewed vigor. She discovered a useful collection of furniture under the dust sheets in the parlor, including comfortable chairs and a sofa that needed only cleaning and minor repairs. The dining room revealed a handsome table that could seat 8, perfect for ranch business discussions. In the master bedroom, which would be Kieran's, she cleaned thoroughly, aired the mattress, and made up the bed with the best linens she could find. The adjoining sitting room with its desk and bookshelves would make an excellent office for him to manage ranch affairs. By noon, Sarah's energy began to flag. Heeding the doctor's warnings and her own body's signals, she forced herself to sit on the porch with a cup of tea, resting in the dappled shade while making additional lists for household needs. The valley spread before her, a tapestry of green and gold under the vast Nevada sky. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily on thermals, hunting for prey. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Sarah stood, shading her eyes against the sun. 2 men on horseback were approaching from the direction of town, neither of them Kieran. Her heartbeat quickened with alarm. She was alone, miles from town, with no weapon and no neighbors within shouting distance. As the riders drew closer, Sarah retreated into the house, watching through the window. They reined in their horses in the yard, looking around with obvious interest. One was older, perhaps 50, with a weathered face and silver threading his dark beard. The other was younger, maybe mid-20s, with sandy hair and a lanky build. "Hello, the house," called the older man, remaining mounted. "Anybody home?" Sarah hesitated, then squared her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" Both men touched their hats respectfully. "Madam," said the older one, "we're looking for Kieran Zane. I'm Roy Johnson, this is Tom Wilkes. He hired us to work his cattle." Relief flooded through Sarah. "Mr. Zane is in town for supplies. He said you wouldn't arrive until tomorrow." "Got done with our previous job early," explained Wilkes, the younger man. "Thought we'd come see the place, maybe start setting up." "Of course," Sarah nodded. "Mr. Zane said you'd be staying in the barn until a bunkhouse can be built." "I haven't prepared it yet, but don't worry yourself, madam," Johnson interrupted kindly. "We can manage. Been sleeping rough plenty of times." "At least let me offer you some coffee and food," Sarah insisted. "Mr. Zane would expect hospitality for his men." The cowboys exchanged glances, then dismounted. "That's mighty kind," said Johnson. "Been riding since dawn." In the kitchen, Sarah quickly set out coffee, the remaining biscuits from breakfast, and some jerky Kieran had left. The men ate appreciatively, mannerly despite their obvious hunger. "So you're Mr. Zane's housekeeper?" asked Wilkes between mouthfuls. "Yes, Sarah Anderson." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Anderson," Johnson said. Known the boss long, just since yesterday actually, Sarah admitted, seeing no reason to lie. The cowboys exchanged another look. Yesterday, echoed Wilkes. Sarah gave them a simplified version of her meeting with Kieran, omitting the worst details of her treatment at the Tanners. Both men nodded grimly. Sounds like the boss, Johnson commented. Man's got strong ideas about right and wrong. You've worked with him before. Sarah asked, curious about their perspective. Last spring and summer at Carson River Ranch, Johnson confirmed. Best trail boss I ever rode with. Fair, smart, and won't ask a man to do something he wouldn't do himself. Pays better than most, too, added Wilkes with a grin. Sarah found herself smiling in return. He said you're getting cattle the day after tomorrow, 60 head to start, Johnson nodded. Good breeding stock. Boss has big plans for this place. After finishing their meal, the men insisted on helping Sarah carry fresh water into the house before heading to the barn to assess its suitability for temporary quarters. She returned to her cleaning with renewed energy, pleased by their confirmation of Kieran's character. Late afternoon brought the sound of a wagon approaching. Sarah looked out to see Kieran driving a loaded wagon down the lane, Johnson riding alongside. They must have met on the road, she realized, watching as Wilkes emerged from the barn to help unload. I see you've met the crew, Kieran said when he entered the kitchen, carrying a crate of supplies. They arrived a few hours ago, Sarah confirmed, helping him unpack. They seem like good men. The best, Kieran agreed. I was lucky to hire them away from Carson River. He glanced around the kitchen, noting the transformation. You've been busy. There's still much to do, Sarah demurred, though pleasure at his recognition warmed her. I got everything on your list, plus some things I thought might be useful. Kieran began unpacking bolts of fabric cheerful calico for kitchen curtains, heavier material for the other windows, and a soft blue cotton that matched Sarah's eyes. This last one is for you, for a new dress or two. The general store had a pattern book you can use. Sarah stared at the beautiful fabric, running her fingers along its edge. This is too generous. Consider it part of your wages, Kieran said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Can't have my housekeeper in rags. Before Sarah could respond, Johnson appeared at the door. Boss, where do you want these seed bags? Storage room off the barn, Kieran replied, seemingly relieved by the interruption. I'll be out in a minute to help with the rest. The next few hours were a flurry of activity as supplies were unloaded and stored. Sarah prepared a substantial dinner for all four of them, and they ate at the kitchen table. The men's conversation focused on preparations for the cattle's arrival. Plans were made, tasks assigned, and potential challenges discussed with the easy camaraderie of men who respected each other's expertise. Sarah contributed little to the conversation but observed much. Kieran was a natural leader. She realized not through domineering or bullying, but through clear vision and genuine respect for those who worked with him. The cowboys clearly admired him, and their easy banter spoke of established trust. After dinner, Johnson and Wilkes returned to the barn, where they'd set up comfortable enough quarters with fresh hay for bedding. Sarah insisted on washing the dishes herself, sending Kieran to rest after his long day. You've done more than enough, she said firmly when he protested. And you have an early start tomorrow. To her surprise, he yielded. Wake us at dawn if you would. There's much to prepare before the cattle arrive. Alone in the quiet kitchen, Sarah felt a contentment she hadn't known in years. The work was hard, certainly, but purposeful. She was valued here, her contributions acknowledged. And there was something deeply satisfying about bringing order and comfort to this neglected house, watching it transform under her care. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah caught sight of the blue fabric Kieran had bought, laid carefully across a chair in her room. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. In her experience, men rarely notice such things: the state of a woman's clothing, the small dignities that poverty often stripped away. "He's just a good employer," she reminded herself sternly. "Nothing more." But as she drifted toward sleep, Sarah couldn't quite silence the small voice in her heart that whispered of other possibilities. The next day passed in a whirlwind of activity. The men were up before dawn, preparing corrals and checking fence lines to ensure the ranch was ready to receive its first cattle. Sarah rose equally early, providing a hearty breakfast before turning her attention to the house. By midday, she had managed to clean her permanent quarters off the kitchen to a satisfactory standard and moved her few belongings there. The room was small but pleasant, with a comfortable bed, a small dresser, and a braided rug that brightened the plank floor. The window overlooked what had once been a kitchen garden, now overgrown but showing promise. Sarah spent the afternoon preparing for the cattle drive's arrival. She baked bread, prepared stew that could simmer overnight, and set dried beans to soak for tomorrow's meals. The men would need substantial food after the hard work of moving and settling the herd. As sunset approached, she heard the men returning. Through the kitchen window, she watched Kieran dismount with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He said something to Johnson that made the older man laugh, then glanced toward the house, catching Sarah watching. She ducked back quickly, embarrassed to be caught staring, but not before noting the smile that transformed his serious face. At dinner, the conversation revolved around the next day's plans. The cattle would arrive by mid-morning, driven by their previous owner and several hired hands. "Once the herd is here, things will get busy," Kieran explained to Sarah. "The men will be working long hours getting the cattle settled and learning the land. They'll need substantial meals at odd hours." "I'll be prepared," Sarah assured him. "Just let me know what schedule works best." Later, after Johnson and Wilkes had returned to the barn and the kitchen was clean, Sarah found herself alone with Kieran for the first time that day. He lingered at the table, nursing a final cup of coffee, a ledger open before him. "The house is coming along nicely," he remarked, glancing up from his figures. "You've accomplished more in 2 days than most could in a week." "Thank you." Sarah busied herself with wiping down the already clean counter, unaccountably nervous under his direct attention. "It helps that the house has good bones, as you said. Have you written to your mother yet, to tell her of your change in circumstances?" The question surprised her. "No, I haven't had the chance, and I wanted to be sure." "Sure of what?" Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Sure that this situation would last, that I wasn't jumping from one frying pan into another." Kieran set down his pencil, his expression serious. "I understand your caution. Trust is earned, not given, but I hope you'll write soon. She must be worried." "I will," Sarah promised. "Tomorrow, after the cattle arrive and things settle." "Good." Kieran returned to his ledger, and Sarah took the opportunity to study him unobserved. In the warm lamplight, the planes of his face were softened, though the strength in his jaw and the intelligence in his eyes remained evident. His hands, moving across the page with surprising dexterity, bore the calluses of hard work despite his current prosperity. "Was there something else?" Kieran asked without looking up, startling her. "I was just wondering." Sarah paused, considering whether to voice the question that had been in her mind. "Why Nevada? You could have bought land anywhere after your silver strike." Kieran leaned back in his chair, considering. "I first saw this valley 5 years ago on a cattle drive from California to the mining camps. Something about it stayed with me: the mountains, the clear air, the sense of possibility." He smiled slightly. My mother used to say some places call to your soul. This one called to mine. Your mother sounds wise, Sarah said softly. She was. His expression turned distant. She died when I was 16, influenza. I'm sorry. Kieran shook himself from the memory. It was long ago, but I think she would have approved of this place. He closed his ledger and stood. I should turn in. Tomorrow we'll start early. Good night, Kieran. Good night, Sarah. Rest well. Alone in her small room, Sarah took out paper and pen from her bag. Despite the late hour, she felt compelled to write to her mother now, while the house was quiet and her thoughts were clear. Dear Mother, she began, I hope this letter finds you well, or at least no worse than when I left. So much has changed since my last letter. I am no longer with the Tanner family. Instead, I have found employment with a cattle rancher named Kieran Zane. The words flowed easily as Sarah described the events of the past few days, her new position, and the decent treatment she was receiving. She was careful not to embellish or create false hope, but even the unadorned truth represented a dramatic improvement in her circumstances. I will send money as soon as I receive my first wages, she promised. Enough for the doctor and perhaps to hire someone to help around the house. Please don't worry about me. For the first time since coming west, I believe I have found a place where I can thrive, not merely survive. She signed the letter with love, sealed it, and set it aside to post when next someone traveled to town. As she prepared for bed, Sarah acknowledged the lightness in her heart. Whatever tomorrow might bring with the cattle and the increased workload, she faced it with a sense of purpose and possibility that had been absent for far too long. Dawn arrived with a symphony of activity, horses nickering, men calling to each other, the clatter of tack and equipment being prepared. Sarah rose immediately, stoking the kitchen fire and starting breakfast. By the time the men arrived at the back door, she had coffee brewing, biscuits baking, and thick slices of ham sizzling in the pan. Smells like heaven, Miss Anderson, Wilkes said appreciatively as he entered, hat in hand. Just what we need before a long day, Johnson agreed, taking his place at the table. Kieran was the last to arrive, having already checked the corrals and water troughs. Everything looks good, he reported as he accepted a cup of coffee from Sarah. Carson's men should be here with the herd by mid-morning. The men ate quickly, complimenting Sarah on the food between mouthfuls. As they finished, she wrapped biscuit sandwiches for them to take, knowing it might be hours before they returned. You've thought of everything, Kieran said with evident approval. It's my job, Sarah replied simply. Good luck with the cattle. Left alone, Sarah tackled the day's work with vigor. She cleaned the remaining downstairs rooms to a reasonable standard, made more bread, and prepared a hearty stew that could wait until the men returned, hungry from their labors. Mid-morning, she paused in her work at the sound of distant lowing. Moving to the porch, she shaded her eyes against the sun and spotted dust rising from the trail leading to the ranch. The cattle were arriving. Sarah watched from a distance as the herd approached 60 head of cattle moving at a steady pace, guided by 5 riders including Kieran, Johnson, and Wilkes. 2 unfamiliar men must be Carson and his help, she guessed, watching as the group skillfully directed the animals toward the waiting corrals. The next few hours were a blur of activity as the cattle were sorted, counted, and settled into their new home. Sarah returned to her duties, but couldn't resist occasionally glancing out the window to observe the work. Kieran moved with confident authority among the animals, his commands clear and his presence calming to the sometimes skittish cattle. By late afternoon, the dust had settled, and the cattle were secured in their new pasture. Sarah heard voices in the yard and looked out to see Kieran shaking hands with an older man, presumably Carson, before the latter mounted up to leave with his helper. When Kieran, Johnson, and Wilkes finally entered the kitchen, they were dusty, sweaty, and visibly exhausted but triumphant. 62 head, Kieran announced, washing his hands at the sink. Carson threw in 2 extra as a gesture of goodwill. Everything went smooth as silk, Johnson added, lowering his aching body into a chair. Good stock, well behaved on the drive. Sarah served the waiting stew along with fresh bread and coffee. The men ate ravenously, the satisfaction of a job well done evident in their relaxed postures despite their fatigue. This is exactly what was needed, Kieran said, accepting a second helping. Thank you, Sarah. Will the cattle settle in easily? She asked, genuinely curious about ranch operations. They'll need watching for the first few days, Wilkes explained between mouthfuls. Make sure they find water, don't break through any weak spots in the fencing. But they're good animals, Kieran added. Carson's been breeding cattle for 30 years. He knows quality. After the meal, Sarah insisted the men rest while she cleaned up. Even Kieran was too tired to argue, retreating to the parlor where Sarah had earlier cleared and repaired a comfortable armchair. From the kitchen, she could hear the low murmur of the men's voices as they discussed the next day's tasks. The routine of ranch life quickly established itself over the following weeks. Sarah rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men, who worked from first light until dusk managing the herd, repairing fences, and improving the ranch buildings. She kept the house, cooked their meals, mended their clothes, and gradually transformed the neglected property into a comfortable home. True to his word, Kieran began construction on a proper bunkhouse as soon as the cattle were settled. Johnson and Wilkes moved into the new quarters with evident appreciation, though they continued to take their meals at the main house. Sarah's first payday came and went, with Kieran counting out $20 in cash as promised. She immediately set aside $15 to send to her mother, wrapping the bills carefully in a letter detailing her improving situation. "Would you post this when you go to town tomorrow?" she asked Kieran, handing him the sealed envelope. "Of course," he promised, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "Is there anything else you need from Genoa?" Sarah hesitated, then produced a small list. "Just a few personal items if it's not too much trouble." The next day, Kieran returned not only with her requested items but also with a package wrapped in brown paper. "This came for you," he said, handing it to her. "Addressed to the ranch." Sarah stared at the package in confusion before recognizing her mother's handwriting. "But how? I sent a telegram when I first hired you," Kieran explained, "letting your mother know you were safe and where to reach you." Stunned by this unexpected thoughtfulness, Sarah could only murmur her thanks before retreating to her room to open the package privately. Inside, she found a letter from her mother expressing relief at her improved situation, along with a small family Bible and a lace handkerchief that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. "I want you to have these now," her mother wrote, rather than waiting for some future inheritance. "The Bible to guide you, and the handkerchief as a reminder that beauty has its place even in a practical life." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she held the treasured items. That Kieran had thought to contact her mother, to ease a stranger's worry without being asked, spoke volumes about his character. Life at the Zane ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm as spring ripened into early summer. The cattle thrived on the lush valley grass, and Kieran's careful management was already showing results. Sarah's responsibilities grew to include a vegetable garden she'd reclaimed from weeds, providing fresh produce for their meals. She also began making butter and cheese from the milk of the 2 dairy cows Kieran purchased at her suggestion. On Sundays, her day off, Sarah sometimes rode into Genoa for church services. initially accompanied by one of the men but eventually confident enough to make the journey alone on Daisy, who had become her regular mount. Other Sundays, she spent writing letters to her mother, or working on the new dresses she was making from the fabric Kieran had given her. It was on one such Sunday in late June that Sarah, wearing her newly completed blue dress, decided to explore the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. Kieran had mentioned a swimming hole there, and the day was warm enough to make the idea of cool water enticing. She rode Daisy at a leisurely pace, enjoying the freedom of movement and the beauty of the land. The creek was exactly where Kieran had described, rushing clear and cold between rocky banks shaded by cottonwoods and willows. Following it downstream, Sarah soon discovered the swimming hole, a deep, quiet pool where the creek widened before continuing its journey. Dismounting, Sarah tied Daisy to a tree where she could graze, then removed her boots and stockings to dangle her feet in the water. The cold was shocking at first, but quickly became refreshing in the summer heat. Birds called in the trees overhead, and dragonflies skimmed the water's surface. Sarah leaned back on her hands, face tilted to catch the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, and allowed herself a rare moment of pure contentment. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her reverie. She quickly pulled her feet from the water, reaching for her discarded stockings, when Kieran appeared through the trees on his stallion. "Sarah," he said, clearly surprised to find her there. "I'm sorry I didn't realize you'd discovered this spot." "You mentioned it some time ago," she explained, embarrassed to be caught in such an informal state. "I hope you don't mind my exploring." "Not at all. The ranch is your home too." Kieran dismounted, tying his horse near Daisy. "I often come here on Sundays to think. The sound of water clears my mind." Sarah began to rise. "I'll leave you to your thoughts." "No, please stay," Kieran said quickly. "Unless you'd prefer solitude." She hesitated, then settled back onto her rock. "I don't mind company." Kieran sat on a fallen log nearby, removing his hat and running a hand through hair that had grown longer since she'd first met him. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. "That dress suits you," Kieran said eventually, his voice casual though his eyes were appreciative. "The color matches your eyes." Sarah smoothed the fabric over her knees, pleased by the compliment. "Thank you for the material. It's the nicest thing I've owned in years." "You've earned it and more." Kieran picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the pool. "The ranch has never run so smoothly. Johnson says your cooking alone is worth double what I pay you." Sarah laughed. "He's easily impressed by any food that isn't his own trail cooking." "True enough," Kieran agreed with a smile. "But he's right about your value to the ranch." He hesitated, then added, "To me as well." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Sarah's heart quickened, but she kept her expression composed. "I'm glad to be useful," she said carefully. "After the Tanners, I wasn't sure I'd find a decent position again." "You're much more than useful, Sarah." Kieran's voice had softened. "You've helped make a house into a home. You've brought warmth and comfort to a place that was empty before." Sarah didn't know how to respond to this unexpected candor. Part of her wanted to dismiss his words as mere employer's appreciation, but his expression suggested something deeper. "I should return to the house," she said, reaching for her boots. "I promised to prepare something special for Sunday dinner." "Of course." Kieran stood, offering his hand to help her up. When their fingers touched, Sarah felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the cool water or the summer heat. They rode back to the ranch side by side, making casual conversation about ranch matters, but something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement, however subtle, of feelings beyond the professional relationship that had defined their interactions thus far. That evening, as they shared the special dinner, she'd prepared roast chicken with herbs from the garden, fresh bread, and a berry pie made from wild strawberries she'd gathered. Sarah caught Kieran watching her with an expression that made her cheeks warm. Johnson and Wilkes seemed oblivious, focused on their food and their usual banter. But Sarah was acutely conscious of every glance, every time Kieran's hand brushed hers as she passed a dish. Later, after the Cowboys had retired to the bunkhouse, Kieran lingered at the kitchen table while Sarah washed the dishes. "Let me help," he offered, rising to take a towel. "You don't need to, I want to," he said simply, beginning to dry the plates she had washed. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the domestic intimacy of the task both comforting and strangely charged. "Sarah," Kieran began, setting down a dried plate carefully, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "Yes." "The town is having a 4th of July celebration next week. Dance, picnic, the usual festivities." He focused intently on drying a fork. "I was wondering if you might consider attending, with me." "With you?" Sarah echoed, surprised. "As my guest, not my housekeeper," Kieran clarified, finally meeting her eyes. "If that would be agreeable to you." Sarah stared at him, searching for any sign of pity or mere politeness in the invitation. Instead, she found genuine hope and a hint of vulnerability that touched her deeply. "I would like that very much," she said softly. The smile that transformed his face was worth any risk of gossip or misunderstanding their appearance together might cause. "Good," he said simply, but the word carried a world of meaning. They finished the dishes in companionable silence, but the atmosphere between them had changed irrevocably. As they bid each other good night, Kieran's hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Sarah," he said, his voice gentle. "Good night, Kieran." She withdrew her hand reluctantly and retreated to her room, where she sat on the edge of her bed, heart pounding with an emotion she dared not name. The week leading up to the 4th of July passed in a flurry of activity. Ranch work continued as usual, but preparations for the celebration added an undercurrent of excitement. Sarah spent her spare moments altering her best dress, the blue one Kieran had admired, adding some of the lace from her grandmother's handkerchief to the collar and cuffs. The morning of the 4th dawned clear and promising to be hot. Sarah rose early as usual to prepare breakfast for the men, but found Kieran already in the kitchen, coffee made. "I thought you might appreciate sleeping in," he explained at her surprised expression. "It's a holiday after all." "Thank you," Sarah said, touched by the consideration. "Though I'm not sure I remember how to sleep past dawn anymore," Kieran smiled. "A hazard of ranch life. Johnson and Wilkes are already out checking the herd. They'll head into town on their own later." "What time will we leave?" Sarah asked, trying for a casual tone despite the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. "Mid-morning, if that suits you. The picnic starts at noon with the dance to follow in the evening." Sarah nodded, suddenly shy. "That would be fine." After breakfast, she retreated to her room to prepare, taking more care with her appearance than she had in years. She bathed with her precious lavender soap, washed and dried her hair, and pinned it in a more flattering style than her usual practical knot. The blue dress, freshly pressed, highlighted her slim figure and brought out the color in her eyes, just as Kieran had said. When she emerged, Kieran was waiting in the parlor, dressed in clothes she'd never seen before: a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and trousers that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his usually tousled hair. He looked, Sarah thought with a catch in her breath, incredibly handsome. Kieran stood as she entered, his expression freezing for a moment before warming into admiration. "Sarah," he said softly, "you look beautiful." She blushed, unused to such compliments. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself. Shall we?" He offered his arm with a formality that might have seemed affected in another man but suited him perfectly. They rode to town in the wagon rather than on horseback, a concession to their formal clothes and the July heat. Conversation flowed easily between them, ranging from ranch matters to books they had read to childhood memories. Sarah found herself relaxing, remembering that beneath the new awareness between them, they were still the same people who had worked comfortably together for months. Genoa was transformed for the celebration, with bunting and flags adorning the main street. Tables had been set up in the town square for the communal picnic, and a platform constructed for the evening's dance. It seemed the entire population of the Carson Valley had turned out for the festivities. As they secured the wagon and approached the gathering, Sarah became uncomfortably aware of the curious glances directed their way. Whispers followed them, and several women bent their heads together, eyes darting towards Sarah and Kieran. "Everyone's staring," she murmured, self-consciousness threatening to overwhelm her pleasure in the day. "Let them stare," Kieran replied, placing his hand reassuringly at the small of her back. "They're just surprised to see the reclusive Mr. Zane with a beautiful woman on his arm." Before Sarah could respond, they were approached by an older couple, the doctor who had treated Sarah on her first day in Kieran's employ, and a pleasant-faced woman who must be his wife. "Mr. Zane," the doctor greeted them warmly, "and Miss Anderson, looking much recovered since I saw you last. I'm pleased to see my prescription of rest and good food was followed." "It was indeed, Dr. Morgan," Sarah replied with a smile. "Mr. Zane has been most insistent on proper care for all under his employ." "As any decent employer should be," Kieran said firmly. "Margaret, this is Miss Sarah Anderson," Dr. Morgan introduced. "Miss Anderson, my wife Margaret." "Delighted to meet you," Mrs. Morgan said sincerely. "James has spoken of your situation. I'm so glad to see you thriving now." The doctor's wife's genuine warmth helped ease Sarah's discomfort at being the center of attention. As they talked, other introductions were made: the mayor and his wife, the minister, several ranchers and their families. Most were polite if curious, though Sarah noticed a few cool looks from certain ladies of the town, particularly when Kieran's hand remained protectively near her. The afternoon passed pleasantly with food, games, and music. Sarah found herself actually enjoying the attention as Kieran's companion, especially after she overheard one older woman remark to another, "Well, it's about time that handsome Mr. Zane found himself a suitable young lady, and such a pretty one too." As evening approached and the dancing began, Sarah's nervousness returned. It had been years since she'd attended a proper dance, and never with a partner who made her pulse quicken as Kieran did. "Would you care to dance?" he asked as the musicians struck up a lively tune. "I'm afraid I'm rather out of practice," Sarah admitted. "So am I," Kieran said with a smile. "We can be clumsy together." But they weren't clumsy at all. Kieran led with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his time on horseback or working with cattle. Sarah found herself following his lead effortlessly, caught up in the music and the warm pressure of his hand at her waist. They danced several sets, stopping occasionally for refreshments or conversation with townspeople. Sarah spotted Johnson and Wilkes across the square, the older man deep in conversation with a widow who ran the town's bakery, while Wilkes seemed to be enjoying the attention of several young ladies. As the night wore on, the music slowed. Kieran drew Sarah closer for a waltz, their bodies moving in perfect harmony under the stars and lantern light. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the press of his hand against her back, the scent of his shaving soap, the warmth in his blue eyes as they met hers. "I'm glad you came with me tonight," he said softly, for her ears alone. "So am I," Sarah replied, allowing herself to lean slightly into his solid strength. "People will talk," he warned, though his expression suggested he cared little for gossip. "They already are," Sarah said with a small smile. "Mrs. Holloway at the Sierra house asked me directly if there was an understanding between us." Kieran's step faltered slightly. "And what did you tell her?" "That you are my employer and a gentleman and we are friends, all of which is true." He nodded, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Is that all we are, Sarah? Employer and employee, friends?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I haven't allowed myself to think beyond that." "Why not?" "Because I came west to support my mother, not to." She hesitated, uncertain how to express the complicated tangle of emotions she felt. "Not to become involved with anyone, no matter how admirable they might be." Kieran's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Your devotion to your mother is one of the things I most admire about you, but it doesn't have to preclude other attachments." The music ended before Sarah could formulate a response. Kieran released her reluctantly, his eyes still holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It's getting late," he said after a moment. "We should start back before the road gets too dark." The ride home was quieter than the journey into town, but not uncomfortably so. Sarah sat close to Kieran on the wagon seat, the night air cooling rapidly after the warm day. Above them, stars spread in a magnificent canopy across the clear Nevada sky. "Thank you for today," Sarah said as the ranch came into view. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more." "I should be thanking you," Kieran replied, his voice low in the darkness. "Your company made the day special." At the house, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist as her feet touched the ground. They stood close, the night silent around them except for the distant lowing of cattle and the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "Sarah," Kieran began, his voice uncertain for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. "I want you to know that my intentions toward you are honorable. I wouldn't have asked you to accompany me today otherwise." "I know that," she said softly, looking up at him in the starlight. "What I'm trying to say, rather poorly," he continued, "is that my feelings for you have grown beyond those of employer to employee, or even friend to friend." Sarah's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at double speed. "Kieran, you don't need to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know, to consider the possibility of something more between us." Before she could respond, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a touch so gentle it could barely be called a kiss, yet it sent sparks of awareness through her entire body. "Good night, Sarah," he whispered, stepping back with evident reluctance. "Good night, Kieran," she managed, her voice unsteady. Inside her room, Sarah pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his touch. The day had changed everything, or perhaps only acknowledged what had been growing between them for weeks. She should be cautious, she knew. Her position at the ranch, her financial security, her entire future depended on maintaining a proper relationship with Kieran. And yet, the thought of retreating behind professional boundaries now seemed impossible. Somehow, when she wasn't looking, Kieran Zane had become essential to her happiness in a way that went far beyond gratitude for his rescue or appreciation for his fair treatment. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to the darkness, but her heart already knew the answer. The days following the 4th of July celebration brought subtle but significant changes to life at the Zane Ranch. Kieran, true to his word, did not press Sarah for a response to his declaration. Their daily interactions remained largely as before, respectful, friendly, focused on the running of the ranch, but an undercurrent of awareness flowed beneath every glance, every accidental touch. Sarah found herself both anticipating and dreading moments alone with Kieran. The possibility he'd offered something more was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. She had not come west seeking romance, and her practical nature warned of the complications such an entanglement could bring. Yet her heart quickened whenever he entered a room, and the memory of that gentle kiss replayed itself in her dreams. A week after the celebration, a letter arrived from Boston that temporarily pushed these personal concerns aside. Sarah's mother wrote that her condition had worsened, requiring more extensive medical care than previously anticipated. "The money you sent has been a blessing," her mother wrote, "but the doctor now recommends a sanitarium in the mountains for the summer months. He believes the fresh air and specialized treatment might arrest the progress of the disease. I hesitate to ask for more, my dear child, knowing how hard you work for every dollar." Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the letter clutched in trembling hands. The sanitarium would cost far more than she could send from her monthly wages, even saving every penny. Her mother didn't ask directly, but the implication was clear. Without this treatment, her chances of recovery were slim. Kieran found her there, still staring at the letter when he came in for the midday meal. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She looked up, blinking back tears. "It's my mother. Her condition has worsened." "I'm sorry," he said, genuine concern in his voice as he sat beside her. "Is there anything I can do?" Almost against her will, Sarah found herself explaining the situation, the recommended sanitarium, the costs involved, her inability to help despite her improved circumstances. "How much would it cost?" Kieran asked when she finished. $300 for the summer, Sarah replied, the sum seeming impossibly large. "Plus transportation costs." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "I can advance you that amount against your future wages." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "That would take over a year to repay." "Then it will take a year," he said simply. "Your mother needs help now, not when you've saved enough." "I can't accept such charity," Sarah protested, pride warring with desperate concern for her mother. "It's not charity," Kieran countered. "It's an advance on wages fairly earned. You've already increased the value of this ranch far beyond what $300 represents." When she still hesitated, he added gently, "If our positions were reversed, wouldn't you offer the same?" Put that way, Sarah couldn't refuse. "Yes," she admitted. "I would." "Then it's settled." Kieran rose. "I'll ride into town this afternoon and arrange a bank draft to be sent to your mother." "Thank you," Sarah said, emotion making her voice unsteady. "I don't know how to." "You don't need to thank me," he interrupted softly. "Just keep making this house a home, as you've done since you arrived." The following day, Kieran returned from town with confirmation that the money had been wired to Boston, along with a brief telegram to Sarah's mother explaining the arrangement. Sarah's gratitude was overwhelming, but it was complicated by her unsettled feelings about their personal relationship. Did this generous act come with unspoken expectations? Would Kieran now assume her affections could be bought along with her labor? Yet his behavior in the days that followed suggested no such calculation. He continued to treat her with the same respect as always, neither pressing his suit nor withdrawing the warmth that had characterized their interactions since the 4th of July. If anything, he seemed determined to prove that his financial assistance was entirely separate from his personal feelings. July ripened into August, bringing increased activity to the ranch. The cattle thrived under Kieran's management, and plans were made to purchase additional breeding stock before winter. Johnson and Wilkes were joined by a third hand, a quiet Mexican vaquero named Miguel who had worked on some of the largest spreads in California. Sarah's responsibilities expanded accordingly. With 4 men to feed and a larger operation to support, her days were filled from dawn to dusk. Yet she found satisfaction in the work, pride in the flourishing household she managed, and increasing confidence in her place within the ranch's ecosystem. Letters from Boston brought cautiously optimistic news. The mountain sanitarium was proving beneficial, with Sarah's mother reporting improved breathing and more energy than she'd had in months. Each letter expressed profound gratitude to both Sarah and the generous Mr. Zane, whose intervention had made the treatment possible. One particularly hot August afternoon found Sarah in the kitchen garden, harvesting tomatoes and beans for the evening meal. The sun beat down mercilessly, but years in Nevada had taught her to work in the cooler morning hours, rest during the worst of the midday heat, and resume outdoor tasks as the afternoon began to wane. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear Kieran approach until his shadow fell across the garden row. "You'll make Johnson weep with joy when he sees those tomatoes," he remarked, smiling down at her. "He's been complaining about missing fresh vegetables since last winter." Sarah looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. There should be plenty for everyone, with more ripening every day. Kieran crouched beside her, examining the thriving plants. "You've worked magic here. This was nothing but weeds when you arrived." "Hardly magic," Sarah demurred. "Just water, care, and patience, like most worthwhile things in life." Kieran reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the casual intimacy of the gesture sending warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I received another letter from my mother today," Sarah said, seeking safer conversational ground. "The doctors are pleased with her progress. They believe she may be able to return home by October, though she'll need continued care through the winter." "That's wonderful news," Kieran said sincerely. "I'm glad the treatment is helping." "It wouldn't have been possible without your help," Sarah acknowledged, meeting his eyes directly. "I can never repay that kindness fully." "You repay it every day," he replied, his voice softening. "In 1,000 ways that have nothing to do with money." The intensity of his gaze made Sarah's heart race. Since their return from the 4th of July celebration, Kieran had kept his word about not pressing her for a response to his declaration. He had been unfailingly respectful of her need for time to sort through her complicated feelings. But in moments like this, his restraint clearly cost him effort. "Kieran," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what you said that night after the dance." His expression grew very still. "And I'm still not certain what's wise," she admitted. "My position here, my obligations to my mother, the differences in our circumstances all suggest caution." "But," he prompted, hearing the unspoken continuation. "But my heart isn't interested in caution," Sarah confessed, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. "When I'm with you, I feel possibilities I never allowed myself to imagine before." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Sarah," he said, her name almost a caress. "That's all. I ask a chance to explore those possibilities together." He reached for her hand and she gave it willingly. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, solid and reassuring. "I don't know what the future holds," Sarah continued, determined to be honest. "I still have responsibilities that can't be set aside." "I would never ask you to," Kieran assured her. "Your devotion to your mother is part of who you are, part of what I admire about you." He hesitated, then added, "I hope someday to meet her. She must be remarkable to have raised such a daughter." The thought of Kieran meeting her mother, of worlds colliding in a way she'd never anticipated, was strangely exhilarating. "She would like you, I think," Sarah said with a small smile. She always valued straightforwardness and integrity. High praise, Kieran murmured. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers of awareness up her arm. May I kiss you properly this time? The direct question, so typical of his forthright nature, made Sarah laugh even as her pulse quickened. Yes, she said simply. He leaned forward, one hand still holding hers while the other came up to cup her cheek. This kiss was different from the fleeting touch after the dance, still gentle, but with an underlying firmness that spoke of certainty and intent. Sarah's free hand moved to his shoulder, steadying herself as unexpected emotion washed through her. When they finally parted, Kieran rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his breathing slightly unsteady. I've been wanting to do that again since the 4th of July, he admitted. I'm glad you waited, Sarah replied softly. I needed time to be sure, and are you sure? She met his eyes, finding in their clear blue depths the same steadiness and honesty that had characterized all their interactions. Yes, she said. Whatever happens, I want to explore these possibilities with you. The smile he gave her then was worth any risk, any uncertainty the future might hold. The remainder of August passed in a golden haze for Sarah. Her days were still filled with work, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the garden, preserving summer's abundance for the coming winter, but now there were moments of joy scattered throughout like gems. Kieran's hand brushing hers as he helped carry in firewood, shared laughter over coffee in the early morning before the ranch hands appeared, quiet conversations on the porch as twilight painted the valley in purple and gold. They were discreet in front of the ranch hands, maintaining a professional demeanor during working hours. But Johnson's knowing looks and Wilkes's barely concealed grins suggested their changing relationship wasn't much of a secret. You know the boys are taking bets on when you'll make an honest woman of me, Sarah remarked one evening as she and Kieran sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Kieran choked slightly on his coffee. They told you that? Not directly, Sarah laughed. But Miguel isn't as fluent in English as he thinks. I overheard him and Wilkes discussing odds. I'll have a word with them, Kieran frowned. It's disrespectful to you. I don't mind, Sarah assured him, touching his arm lightly. It's not malicious. They care about you, about both of us, I think. Kieran covered her hand with his expression softening. They do. Johnson told me last week I was a damn sight less grumpy since you and I sorted things out. Were you grumpy before? Sarah teased. Focused, Kieran corrected with a smile. Single-minded about building the ranch. And now I'm still focused on the ranch, he said, turning to face her fully. But I've discovered there's room in life for more than one dream. The simple statement, delivered with his characteristic directness, touched Sarah deeply. She leaned forward, brushing her lips against his in a gesture that was becoming wonderfully familiar. September brought the first hints of autumn to Carson Valley. Mornings dawned crisp and cool, though afternoons still held summer's warmth. Ranch activity increased as preparations began for winter hay to be cut and stored, repairs to be made before the first snows, decisions about which cattle to keep through the cold months and which to sell. Sarah, too, felt the quickening pace of seasonal change. She spent long days canning vegetables from the garden, drying herbs, making preserves from wild berries gathered in the foothills. The pantry shelves gradually filled with colorful jars that would bring summer's taste to winter meals. Letters from Boston continued to bring encouraging news. Sarah's mother was responding well to treatment, with doctors optimistic about her return home in October. Her most recent letter included a postscript that made Sarah blush when she read it. You write so warmly about Mr. Zane that I wonder if there might be news of a more personal nature in your next letter. A mother notices these things, my dear. Your face is quite red, Kieran observed, finding Sarah in the kitchen after she'd read the letter. Bad news from Boston. No, quite the opposite, Sarah replied, tucking the letter into her apron pocket. Mother continues to improve, she's just perceptive about certain matters. Kieran raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. Instead, he said, I've been thinking about your mother's return home. She'll need care through the winter, you said. Sarah nodded, wondering where this conversation was leading. Yes, though not as intensive as at the sanitarium. Mainly someone to help with household tasks and ensure she doesn't overexert herself. What if she came here, Kieran suggested, to Nevada, to the ranch? Sarah stared at him. Here, but the journey would be difficult and she's still recovering. The Transcontinental Railroad makes travel easier than it once was, Kieran pointed out, and the dry Nevada air might be better for her lungs than a Boston winter. The idea was so unexpected that Sarah couldn't immediately process it. But where would she stay? My room is barely big enough for me alone. The house has 4 bedrooms, Kieran replied as if the answer were obvious. She could have one of them. Kieran, I can't expect you to accommodate my mother indefinitely, Sarah protested. It's far too much to ask. You're not asking, I'm offering. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. Sarah, I've been trying to find the right moment for this conversation, and perhaps there isn't one, but I need you to know that my feelings for you aren't casual or temporary. Her heart began to race. Kieran, let me finish, he said gently. When I found you at the Tanners, I was drawn to help someone in need. When I brought you here, I was impressed by your competence and grateful for your contribution to the ranch. But over these months, I've come to admire your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. I've come to love you, Sarah. The word hung in the air between them, both shocking and somehow inevitable. I had planned a more romantic setting for this, Kieran continued with a rueful smile, but life on a ranch rarely accommodates perfect timing. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I went to San Francisco last month not just for ranch business. I had another errand in mind. Sarah's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Sarah Anderson, Kieran said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. This man who had rescued her from exploitation, who had treated her with respect and kindness from the first, who had helped her mother without expectation of return, was now offering her his heart and his name. Are you certain? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I came to you with nothing, no dowry, no connections. No, you came with everything that matters, Kieran interrupted. Integrity, courage, compassion. You've transformed this house into a home. You've brought warmth and purpose to my life in ways I never expected. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. Yes, she said, the word emerging as a half laugh, half sob. Yes, I'll marry you, Kieran. His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the pearl gleaming softly in the kitchen's warm light. Now your mother definitely must come to Nevada, Kieran said, drawing Sarah into his arms. She should be at our wedding, and she should know the man her daughter has chosen. Or who has chosen her daughter, Sarah corrected, resting her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. My practical, generous, honorable cowboy. News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Johnson was the first to offer congratulations, followed by a beaming Wilkes and a quietly approving Miguel. When they rode into Genoa the following Sunday, Sarah wearing her pearl ring, townsfolk offered good wishes with varying degrees of surprise and enthusiasm. I knew it, declared Mrs. Holloway at the Sierra house when they stopped for lunch. The moment I saw you two together on the 4th of July, I said to Mr. Holloway, that man's found his match at last. Dr. Morgan and his wife were particularly pleased. I've rarely seen a more fitting partnership, the doctor remarked. Though I admit, when I first treated you, Miss Anderson, I didn't envision such a happy outcome to your trials. Not all reactions were positive. Sarah overheard whispers from some of the town's more socially conscious ladies, questioning the propriety of Kieran marrying his housekeeper. But such murmurs mattered little against the solid happiness she had found. Plans were made for Sarah's mother to travel west as soon as she was released from the sanitarium. Kieran insisted on paying for her journey, arranging for comfortable accommodations on the train and a private room at the Sierra house for her first night in Nevada to rest before the final journey to the ranch. I want her first impressions of Nevada to be positive, he explained when Sarah protested the expense. And I want her first impressions of me to be of a son-in-law who cares for her daughter's happiness above all. October brought cooler temperatures and the first frost. The aspen trees in the foothills turned gold against the evergreens, and the valley took on the soft, hazy quality of autumn. Ranch work continued at a steady pace, with cattle being moved to lower pastures and final preparations made for winter. Sarah spent her spare moments preparing for her mother's arrival, transforming one of the upstairs bedrooms into a comfortable retreat. She sewed new curtains from fabric Kieran bought in town, arranged for a comfortable armchair to be delivered, and stocked the bookshelves with novels and poetry her mother enjoyed. "She'll think she's died and gone to heaven," Sarah remarked as she and Kieran inspected the finished room. "This is nicer than any place she's lived since my father died." "I hope she'll be happy here," Kieran said, his arm around Sarah's waist. "The doctor thinks the climate will benefit her condition." Sarah nodded. "He believes the dry air will be easier on her lungs, especially compared to Boston's damp winters." They had decided on a November wedding, after her mother had time to settle in and regain strength from the journey. It would be a small ceremony at the ranch, with only close friends and the ranch hands in attendance. "We could wait until spring for a larger celebration," Kieran had offered, "if you prefer." But Sarah had shaken her head. "I don't need a grand wedding. Just you, my mother, and the people who matter to us." The day of Elizabeth Anderson's arrival dawned clear and cool. Kieran insisted on accompanying Sarah to town to meet the stage, driving the wagon himself while she sat beside him, alternately excited and nervous. "What if she's too weak for ranch life?" Sarah fretted as they approached Genoa. "What if she doesn't approve of our engagement?" "What if—" "Sarah," Kieran interrupted gently. "From everything you've told me about your mother, she sounds like a practical, loving woman who wants your happiness above all. And if she's half as strong as her daughter, she'll adapt to ranch life just fine." The stage was due at noon, and they arrived with time to spare. Sarah paced the small waiting area of the station while Kieran arranged for her mother's trunk to be loaded onto their wagon when it arrived. The rumble of approaching wheels sent Sarah hurrying outside. The stage pulled up in a cloud of dust, and the driver began helping passengers disembark. Sarah scanned each face anxiously until finally, a slight woman in a dark blue traveling dress appeared at the stage door. "Mother," Sarah called, rushing forward. Elizabeth Anderson looked up, her tired face transforming with joy. "Sarah, oh my dear girl." They embraced tightly, Sarah careful not to squeeze too hard, aware of her mother's fragility despite the improvement in her condition. "Let me look at you," Elizabeth said, stepping back to examine her daughter. "You're positively glowing. Nevada clearly agrees with you." "It's not just Nevada," Sarah admitted with a blush. "Mother, I want you to meet someone." She turned to find Kieran standing respectfully a few paces away, hat in hand. "This is Kieran Zane, my fiancé." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly, but she extended her hand without hesitation. "Mr. Zane, I've heard so much about you in Sarah's letters, though she saved the most important news, it seems." Kieran took her hand gently. "Mrs. Anderson, it's an honor to meet you at last. Your daughter speaks of you with such love and admiration." "The honor is mine," Elizabeth replied, studying him with frank curiosity. "You've been extraordinarily kind to both of us. I owe you my health, perhaps my life." "You owe that to Sarah's love and determination," Kieran corrected. "I merely helped where I could." Elizabeth's approving glance at Sarah spoke volumes. "Well, I look forward to getting to know the man who has captured my practical daughter's heart. It must have been quite a siege." "Mother," Sarah protested, but Kieran laughed. "A long campaign of patience and persistence," he agreed, eyes twinkling. "But the prize was worth any effort." They settled Elizabeth in the wagon with cushions for comfort and blankets against the cooling afternoon air. As they drove through town toward the ranch, she took in the scenery with evident appreciation. "It's beautiful," she remarked, gazing at the mountains rising to the west. "So vast and open. I can understand why you fell in love with this place, Sarah." "Wait until you see the ranch," Sarah replied, happiness bubbling through her. "It's becoming quite impressive under Kieran's management." "I'm sure it is," Elizabeth said, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "But I suspect the ranch isn't the only thing my daughter has fallen in love with." Kieran's chuckle and Sarah's blush were answer enough. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirl of activity and adjustment. Elizabeth Anderson proved to be as adaptable as her daughter, quickly settling into ranch routines despite her still recovering health. She spent mornings resting and afternoons helping with lighter household tasks, her presence bringing a new dimension of warmth to the already thriving home. "Your mother is remarkable," Kieran observed one evening as he and Sarah sat on the porch after dinner. Inside, Elizabeth was teaching Johnson to play chess, the grizzled cowboy having admitted a lifelong curiosity about the game. "She always was," Sarah agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Even when my father died and we lost everything, she never lost her dignity or her determination to make the best of circumstances." "I see where you get it from," Kieran said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The 2 Anderson women are formidable." "Soon to be 1 Anderson and 1 Zane," Sarah reminded him with a smile. The wedding day arrived with perfect late autumn weather, crisp and clear, with golden light bathing the mountains and valley. The ceremony was held in the ranch house parlor, decorated with evergreen boughs and late-blooming wildflowers. The minister from Genoa officiated with Elizabeth, the ranch hands doctor, and Mrs. Morgan, and a few other close friends in attendance. Sarah wore a new dress of ivory silk that Kieran had ordered from San Francisco, insisting it was a necessary expense, despite her protests. Elizabeth had helped style her hair, securing it with pearl combs that had been a wedding gift from Kieran. "You look beautiful," her mother said, blinking back tears as they prepared in Sarah's room. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become." "Do you think he would approve?" "Of Kieran?" Sarah asked, suddenly needing this reassurance. "My dear, your father valued honesty, hard work, and kindness above all," Elizabeth replied, straightening Sarah's collar. "From everything I've seen, Kieran Zane embodies those qualities. Yes, your father would approve wholeheartedly." Downstairs, Kieran waited nervously in his best suit, Johnson serving as his best man. When Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs on her mother's arm, his expression of wonder and love nearly brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony itself was brief but deeply meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through all of life's joys and sorrows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran's kiss was tender but possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food Sarah and Elizabeth had prepared together, music from a fiddle played by one of their neighbors, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As evening fell, the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds to begin their life together in the home they had created from a once empty house. That night, as moonlight spilled through the window of what was now their shared bedroom, Sarah lay in Kieran's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Happy?" he asked softly, his hand tracing patterns on the bare skin of her shoulder. "More than I ever imagined possible," Sarah answered truthfully. "A year ago, I was trapped in a nightmare with the Tanners, believing I had no escape. Now I have everything I never dared to dream of: meaningful work, a beautiful home, my mother's health restored, and a husband who loves me." "And who will continue to love you for all the days of his life," Kieran promised, drawing her closer. "You were working until you collapsed when I found you, Sarah. Now you work because you choose to, creating something lasting and worthwhile. Our ranch, our home, our life together." "Our future," Sarah added, thinking of the children they hoped would someday fill the house with laughter. "Our future," Kieran agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. Outside, the night was peaceful, stars scattered across the vast Nevada sky. The cattle rested in the lower pastures, the horses dozed in the barn, and the ranch house stood solid and welcoming against the darkness. Within its walls, Sarah and Kieran Zane began their shared journey, two people who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, respect, and the promise of a future limited only by the breadth of their dreams. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Sarah Zane stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching her husband approach on horseback. Behind him, Johnson and their oldest ranch hand, Miguel, drove a small herd of cattle toward the home pasture, dust rising in the golden light of sunset. At 37, Kieran was in his prime, confident, successful, respected throughout the territory. The Zane Ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres, with breeding stock sought after by ranchers from California to Colorado. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a proper kitchen wing that was Sarah's pride and joy, and a dedicated study where Kieran managed the ranch's increasingly complex business affairs. "Mama, Papa's home." 3-year-old Thomas raced past Sarah's skirts, eager to greet his father. Behind him toddled 1-year-old Grace, her chubby legs still unsteady but her determination unmistakable. Sarah smiled, one hand resting on her again swelling abdomen where their third child grew. 5 years of marriage had brought challenges: harsh winters, cattle disease, financial uncertainties, but far more joys than sorrows. Elizabeth Anderson still lived with them, occupying the sunny bedroom overlooking the garden. Her health had improved dramatically in Nevada's dry climate, and while she would never be robust, she had found meaningful purpose helping raise her grandchildren and managing the substantial kitchen garden that now supplied much of the ranch's produce. Kieran dismounted in one fluid motion, scooping Thomas into his arms while reaching down to ruffle Grace's dark curls. His eyes sought Sarah's across the yard, lighting with the same warmth and love that had sustained them through every trial and triumph. "How are my 3 favorite people?" he called, striding toward the porch with Thomas perched on his shoulders and Grace attempting to keep pace beside him. 4, Sarah corrected with a meaningful glance at her middle. Kieran's smile broadened as he reached the porch. Setting Thomas down carefully, he gathered Sarah in a gentle embrace, mindful of her condition. "4, then," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Though I suspect you'll always be first among equals." Inside, the house hummed with the comfortable rhythms of ranch life. The long dining table that had once seemed excessive now accommodated not only family, but the expanded crew of ranch hands who took their meals at the main house. The parlor that had been filled with dust-covered furniture when Sarah first arrived was now the heart of family gatherings, with children's toys scattered among the comfortable chairs and books. After dinner, when the children were finally asleep and the house had quieted, Sarah and Kieran sat on the porch swing he had built for her second anniversary gift. The valley spread before them, bathed in moonlight, the cattle mere shadows in the distant pastures. "Johnson says this might be our best year yet," Kieran remarked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "The breeding program is paying off, and the new water system has improved the southern pastures beyond expectation." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, leaning into his solid strength. "Though I suspect you've been saying that every year since we married," Kieran chuckled. "Perhaps, but it's been true each time." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the creaking of the swing and the chorus of night insects the only sounds. "You ever think about that day?" Sarah asked suddenly. "When you found me at the tanner's?" "Often," Kieran admitted. "I thank Providence regularly that I chose that day to introduce myself to the neighbors." Sarah turned slightly to look at him in the moonlight. "I've never asked why did you really offer me a job that day?" "You didn't know me, had no reason to trust me." Kieran considered the question seriously. "At first, it was simple decency. No one deserved the treatment you were receiving." He paused, his fingers absently stroking her arm. "But there was something in your eyes, even as you were collapsing from exhaustion, a dignity, a strength that impressed me. I wanted to know the woman who could maintain such courage in those circumstances." "And now that you know her?" Sarah asked softly. "Now I love her more than I thought possible," Kieran replied, drawing her closer. "The mother of my children, the heart of my home, the partner in all my endeavors. The woman who was willing to work herself to death for those she loved, and who now works with joy to build something lasting for our family." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, contentment filling her like the warm Nevada sunlight. From desperate beginnings, a young woman collapsing from exploitation, a cowboy's impulsive intervention had grown a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone. "I love you, Kieran Zane," she whispered, the words as true now as when she'd first spoken them on their wedding day. "And I love you, Sarah Zane," he answered, his voice deep with emotion. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." In the quiet night, under the vast canopy of stars, their promises echoed those made years before, not just of love, but of partnership, respect, and the shared dream of a future built together, one day at a time.